Well, first off, I want to thank my panelists. They've come from all around the country to attend, and the reason I've called them all together is because I've been active in the data interoperability and the infrastructure for a number of years, and I participated in a number of trade associations that are looking to solve the data inequality as well as the data interoperability. And what I found was that some really well-meaning people were focused on their silo, not really recognizing the value of reaching outside of that silo and creating a cross-industry sector. And so what we have today is I've asked the individuals that I've known that are leading the effort to come together and actually meet each other, to synergize with each other. We had a great dinner last night. We had a pre-meeting before where they could meet each other and talk about the possibilities of synergy amongst silos and taking the lead that they've been doing within their individual efforts and synergizing them broader across market segments. So what you have in our panel today, and I'm going to let each one of them describe themselves, but I wanted to talk about the cross-section that we bring. First, we have construction. At the end of the day, the data that's being managed by systems is really in the trenches construction. And we have Don Bowden from the builder chain, who is also part of a broader effort called the OS2 effort, which is being undertaken at the University of Texas at Austin, looking to build a new generation of how to build. And on that regard, they're looking at large capital projects. So for that, we have Bill Van Sweringen from ExxonMobil. Jan, who you just heard from, is focusing much more on the small capital projects. On the bigger picture, Jan mentioned XBRL. Al Berkeley helped create XBRL back when he was the president of NASDAQ and created a foundation that allows us now to all understand that we have a common dictionary as a country. And we can report now to the SEC. We can now also report to the DOE. And another federal agency has joined the SBA. The Small Business Administration likewise has the same need for information on a contractor or construction as anybody else in the digital ecosystem. With us is Peter Gibbs, who when he was at the SBA helped bring in XBRL and started to modernize the systems at the SBA so that they can tap into the efficiency that Jan was talking about. And then we also have myself for insurance. So I have one person who is missing. That's Don Cardinal. He's with Financial Data Exchange, and they've been creating an opportunity for consumers at banks to be able to pull their own information out of their bank and give it to third-party vendors. So it could be wealth management, but it also could be applying for finance, insurance, or surety. So what we literally have when Jan talks about on-bill, that means a customer can borrow money for an energy efficiency project and have that financing be put on their bill. So you can imagine the stakeholders that are involved is the utility, is the contractor, the financing entity. So to manage all of that is Concord Servicing, who actually manages all of the state of California, New York, and a number of programs that allow that data to be realized into something functional and also efficient. So I'm going to start with my question, and then, John did show up. I told you can't show up without your guitar.
I was in the back listening. So
So John I've asked to be on our panel because he is at the University of Texas at Austin, and one of his specialties is entrepreneurial and startups. And so everybody on this table is actually entrepreneurial because this data interoperability is creating new opportunities and new businesses to create new products. So I asked John to come on and talk about the entrepreneurial side. So I'm going to jump right into the presentation itself. So Bill, your work with the Construction Industry Institute and CURT and OS2 is involved with large capital projects in the industrial, commercial, and infrastructure space. Could you describe what the OS2 research is working on? And then I'll follow up with Don on the details.
Okay. Thank you, Dixon. So,
Introduce yourself.
Oh,
and
so I'm Bill Van Sweringen. I'm with ExxonMobil. I'm in their global projects group, which builds the refineries, chemical plants, offshore rigs, and so forth. I've been a project manager probably more decades than anybody else here. So let me tell you about CII and what we've been doing in the last couple of years. So CII, if you don't know it, is an industrial organization. It's about 150 companies of owners, contractors, and suppliers, and they're associated with the University of Texas. We basically try to do research and development for the improvement of engineering and construction. And we service a number of industries, the oil and gas industry, which I'm a member of, the healthcare, the mining, and commercial areas. So it's a pretty wide cross-section of work. So the construction industry is inefficient, especially when you take a look at the productivity increases that you've seen in the automotive space, in the aerospace, and even the agricultural space. And the CII estimates that our projects have about 40% waste. So imagine how many more critical climate change infrastructure projects, energy projects, hospitals you could build with the same spending if you could eliminate the 40% waste. So many of the improvements that CII has been working on over the years, and even in conferences like this where you're trying to solve a data integration problem, you're focusing on one work process to try to get improvements. Yet to build these big projects, there's multiple work processes to be done. So we've been doing this for about 5 decades at least. And yet we still have 40% waste in our projects. So something's been missing in our prior work. So for the last 3 years at CII, we've been researching a new business model to improve the execution of projects. Its working title is called Operating System 2.0. And that's kind of in reference to the Industrial Revolution was Operating System 1.0 versus the Agricultural Revolution. So traditionally in the construction industry, and particularly Western contracting, it's based on an adversarial approach where the parties don't trust each other, right? There's distrust. And this is a very inefficient way of doing business because everybody's trying to push the risk onto somebody else. And then they're layering in protections for themselves. And in addition, most of you in the room know, our construction industry is an old analog system based on paper stuff. And as Jan said in her previous one, we're just trying to digitize what we already do by paper, as opposed to bringing new ways of doing the business. So let me tell you about the new business model and the 4 research areas. The first area is about creating a more collaborative relationship between the parties based on long-term common goals. And the idea is to build multiple projects together, and each one gets better and better as you get experience and you build trust between the parties. Now, you can't really have a good collaborative relationship unless you talk about risk, right? So part of this is having a very transparent, unbiased view of risk so that you can talk about eliminating it, mitigating it, or who's best to carry that risk. So the secondary, and I'll just say that Lloyd's of London has been kind of collaborating and competing for about 300 years. This could be a business model to help us understand how to be more collaborative. The secondary area of research is early supplier engagement and minimizing interfaces. So Often the execution strategy for these large projects is decided by the owner, the main contractor, and maybe another big player. And everybody else, the hundreds of suppliers that come in after that, they're locked into that early decision, right? And so this blocks the innovation that all these other people could bring to finding a better way to do the project, all right?
Procurement offices, contracting offices, agencies to try to decrease the number of bond forms, then trying to move this forward is not going to work, right? You also have to look at sharing of material or sharing of information. In theory, that sounds good, but as we all know in construction, there's hardly ever disputes, right? That's a joke, by the way. So you got to make all the parties involved understand what sharing of information means, because if there is a dispute, then it becomes a legal issue, and some companies, whether it is the surety company, whether it's a construction company, that to them it's not a good thing for them to do because everyone has the same information, right? So somehow you have to explain that to everyone in the ecosystem, what all this stuff means, right? Because you're trying to get them to change something that they've been doing for hundreds of years, right? My experience at SBA with XBRL, and it took 7 years to change one form, right? So the working process schedule, that's the only thing that's in the XBRL format. But there's a whole system of forms and process that needs to be formalized. Hopefully it doesn't take 7 or 13 years, but it's a start. And the final thing I would say is, for everyone that's in this room, if you're in the decision-making process, you have to commit to making people understand the small stuff that's going to give you better results, whether it's saving money, whether it's saving time, whether it's increasing the participation by small businesses, whatever it is. You have to be very convincing to the leadership, at your organization, internal, external. And again, this is hard work, but I think panels like this, talking about it, is going to give people an opportunity to understand how difficult this work is.
Thank you, Peter. And so, as we mentioned, one of our emphasis is on small business, and efficiency allows small business to be at the table. Jan Blue Banyan has been leading the effort in trying to broaden the ability of smaller businesses to participate in the solar expansion, as well as the off-takers, the borrowers, the homeowners. Describe a little bit about what you've been working to help small businesses and broaden the pool of participants.
So we did focus initially on the residential solar installers, and we did that primarily with the basics that you would expect for any project management, like project templates. What is it that you're doing every single time? What we found, however, is that we needed to take project management up a level. And so we added some interesting features where different projects will have different things required if you live in a different state. Or if you're interfacing with a different utility, then you get a different document template or a different URL for how to do your interconnection with that utility. Certain AHJs require 3-line diagrams for their permitting, others require 1-line diagrams. So we actually actively captured the tribal knowledge about how the project would change based on each of these conditions and change the project template so that we could batch the work and get it done efficiently. We have a company who is on Solar Success but just had accounting only, and they can run 200 residential solar installations a month with 50 people on the back end, which they thought was spectacular, and they were super happy with it. And then we have a company who's running the accounting and project management together, putting those two events together so that the project managers are fundamentally the people saying when something gets done, and then accounting is not the construction office den mother running around beating everybody over the head saying, get your stuff in and tell me what it's done. By shifting the culture so that project management was driving when things were completed, we have a company that's running 300 to 350 projects a month with 50 people on the back end. The same staff can have over 50% more revenue coming in and processing it. It is an absolute game changer for small businesses, especially where demand is absolutely crazy, like in the solar market. And I am just now appreciating, Peter, how much we have benefited from starting with solar, because they are already kind of innovative and on the front end of the construction. I didn't realize the hundreds of years of challenge that we don't have to overcome because we started with the solar. So I'm actually really grateful that that all fell into place that way. But we do want to bring that to the general construction as well. Because fundamentally, we do have all the resources we need to succeed. We have all the resources we need to address climate change. What we need to do is distribute those resources, distribute the technology, distribute the insight, and transmit the resources to where it's needed. It's a distribution problem fundamentally. So if we can distribute that to the small businesses so they have the same advantages as the larger companies would have, it's going to absolutely change the world and make our entire global community more resilient.
So Jan's system controls all the data for a project from its inception through permitting and then actually tracks it through construction. So you can imagine the value of her database if you're an insurance company, a finance company, or a surety company. And with her work on Solar App and her work on the orange button, she's creating the opportunity for any number of innovators to come up with products and services that can take advantage of it. But data is just data by itself. It has to be functional, it has to be used. And one of the companies that has really led the industry in creating an asset-based data use and creating value is Concord Servicing. Concord Servicing provides the accounting and the tracking of all these projects for the utilities that allows companies to participate. Tom, would you talk a little bit about Concord Servicing and how you help feed the digital ecosystem?
Yeah, glad to, Dixon. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be on the panel today. Tom Myers from Concord Servicing. We're a third-party servicing company based out of Scottsdale, Arizona. We've been around for 30 plus years, and we've been in the energy markets for probably close to 15 now. Started out with kind of a pilot finance program with NYSERDA. I don't know if you're familiar with the New York State Energy Research Development Authority. It's by far the largest loan and incentive program in the U.S. And they're an innovator and they're a pusher of the market. And we service their loans both in a on-bill format and a direct bill format across 7 different utilities, across hundreds of contractors, across multiple programs. So understanding the complexity of just that single program, the data information sharing, you could imagine is really, really critical to the success and the scalability of those programs. As I shared with the panel earlier, I have this utopian dream of accelerating the scalability of equitable decarbonization. Now, those are a lot of buzzwords, but they're true. There's meaning behind those, right? There's a lot of underserved markets in this country. There's a lot of underserved communities and opportunities for us to accelerate that clean energy market to all folks in the US and hopefully globally, to be honest. Shouldn't be concentrated here. But we really need to intersect the data so that we can share that information so that we can recruit more lenders into the space. There's plenty of interest. Jan, we talked about the liquidity side of things earlier, and there's a lot of it But everybody kind of sits back and goes, wow, this thing is really accelerating quickly, and especially with the IIJA and the IRA, this thing is going to go quickly. But give me information, right? Tell me about the delinquency and the defaults and some of this information. And up until a few years ago, one of the largest programs in the country didn't want to share that information because they thought it was proprietary. And then realized if you anonymize that information, the power that has. So it is now shared from that organization, thanks to them, but it's just a small piece of the puzzle. I've worked with the DOE, NREL, and Berkeley on some studies on the delinquency and default rate, the risk rate, right? So what's the risk rate for the lenders and the buyers on the back end through a securitization? And the reluctancy or the systems that don't exist to share the data is interesting. So we heard the word Excel hell earlier, and it is so true. It is so true. There's a large utility in the southeast, I won't mention them, but they're doing a pretty large-scale on-bill financing program across multiple small utilities that are within that utility structure. And a couple years ago, they told me that they don't have real-time data or real information on where the delinquencies and the defaults sit within that program because the lender of that program is using Excel spreadsheets and it's not up to date and it's just not real-time data. So that's shameful. Currently we manage over 10 billion in assets, and that's across hundreds of millions of obligations because they're small. And so we're mostly in the residential home improvement, energy efficiency, solar space, some small business, some small commercial. But with the amount of transactions that happen in this space, there has to be efficiencies and there has to be communication within systems. So if there was, and I'm not an IT person either, so I might take the cake on the least IT knowledgeable person on the panel, but we can talk about that later, Peter. But if there was a blockchain, if there was some way for all of these organizations, and a lot of them are subsidized or supported by ratepayer dollars, and those programs really kind of have a responsibility, I think, to the public as they're using public dollars to make those programs as efficient and scalable as possible. And if we could share that data, intersect that data from all of these programs around the country, you're going to have a lot more capital lender support on the front end, and then in a securitization, you're going to have better advanced rates, and you're going to have better buyers on the back end, and you're going to scale these programs. There's plenty of money out there, and again, just intersecting this data, I think, is really, really critical for us to scale it.
Yes, Jan.
Well, I just had a question and a response to Tom and a question for Al, actually. My observation is that there is so much money for ESG projects that are environmental sustainability and good governance, that it isn't a matter of having the money. We literally need to put what is stopping our ability to address climate change is not money, it's not will, it's that we need to have enough data so that we know that where we're deploying it is smart. It is literally this data management and the digitalization is currently the gate for deploying more solar faster, getting more renewables out there and addressing climate change. I mean, it is kind of stunning because it is imminently solvable, except that it requires everybody getting on the same page, which is an interesting global cooperation challenge altogether. But is it true that this data is actually a gate to deploying more ESG money?
I think it's absolutely a gate, and I think that, what people need to know is what the default rates are. As you were just saying, the default rates have been a secret for the past. I completely agree with the concept that we should go back to the SEC and say, if this information becomes available, can we create this as a separate asset class and have better rates, lower costs available to the public? Because it would fall, if the transparency is there and the data is representative of the true story being told, then the money will follow it.
So what we're talking about is a digital infrastructure. And if you think about it, a contractor is going to start a solar project. The data goes into Jan Systems. Jan System will feed my system for surety. It'll feed Peter's system if we're going to partner with his company and the SBA. It would go into Concord Servicing. The same information is now being used by multiple systems to do what they need to do at tremendously reduced costs, and that really helps the small business. But it's just as impactful, as Bill was mentioning, on the OS2 initiative to help better define risk, better allocate risk, and to create an environment of collaboration. So we think by reducing costs and creating the framework for innovation and new products, you're going to have a whole generation of new entrepreneurs coming up. And one of the people that we've asked John to talk about is the entrepreneurial or the capitalism, and how do you do that? And what are you doing at the University of Austin to help us?
Well, yeah,
Or University
this
of
is
Texas?
a very interesting discussion. University of Texas at Austin, second day being emeritus. Give myself a hand. Second day being emeritus. Right. I think that it's very interesting, and there are a number of themes that run through here. Number one is open innovation. Number two is trust. Number three is the technology itself. And number four is data. Okay? And number five is the slowness in which y'all are moving. Okay? I think when you look at any traditional kind of enterprise, you know, we have a saying about open innovation. Open innovation is the idea that everybody outside of your company is smarter than people within your company. When you have traditional things like you're talking about, how do you get the Catholic Church, the Baptist Church to cooperate when there's not trust, say, in the business world? So what open innovation has done, and it's very, very difficult. So you talk about the issue here that we have at the University of Texas at Austin. In traditional ways, we call it a consortium. A consortium is Silicon Valley, and it's called not only open innovation, it's called shared information, such that I can switch parking lots, I can switch jobs without switching parking lots. Okay? So no matter how much data that you have, you look at the CEOs of the companies, when you look at the contractors, there's still internal competition. In the business world, this is the business world, we call it co-opetition. The whole idea that you can be after the exact same goal, but we are cooperating with each other because we are after the same goal. So one thing you have to do is understand that the open innovation, and this, by the way, is where the entrepreneurs go in and change the system. So while some people are worried about what to do with the data, because it's hard to disrupt some industries, other entrepreneurs will say, okay, you know, this car industry does not know what it's doing, so Tesla's going to come in here and we're going to get rid of the basic dealerships. The other thing is trust. People have talked about blockchain, and remember, blockchain is a ledger system. So we are playing poker. That means that every card that I have, you can see. Okay? It's a ledger system, which means that everybody can see what everybody else is doing, as established by IBM. And when you see what everybody else is doing, it should break down, if you will, the categories which really delay open innovation. Open innovation is a new kind of deal that we are really, really struggling with, where that all of your technology, all of your ideas are out there in your company. And then you bring in, if you will, the entrepreneurs who make it go, and you fund that. And what that does is create trust. So blockchain should create a certain kind of trust that you have when working with other people, but it's co-opetition. What we have to do in America is compete with different kind of countries, whether it's batteries in China, right? Whether it's electric automobiles in China. There's got to be a co-opetition between all of those things. Now, the great thing about America is we have entrepreneurs, all right? Entrepreneurs who would say, you know what? the book of the month club has been talking about all of these things for 45 years. Let's create a book that's digital. Bam! The regular books are gone. Okay? The construction industry has been talking about X, Y, and Z for 100 years. I'm an entrepreneur. I have a new way of doing this. Bam! So we call that a disruption. So all of these kind of come together in this thing that we call data. I mean, what is data? I mean, you know, I saw my first computer when I was at Northwestern in graduate school in Chicago, freezing. I also froze in Austin last year too, but that's a different story. Because my electricity went down, right? What is data? In the old days, for everybody who understands the old days, it was garbage in and garbage out. Garbage in and garbage out. What you need is an idea, being a professor, it is a theory of how the world works. If you don't have a theory of how the world works and how you can exactly create the innovation for the new companies out of the data, then it is garbage in and garbage out. So how do you create the idea that you cannot do garbage in and garbage out? You've got to have the best people in that industry. The best people in that industry who would say the following: for us to be competitive and for us to change, right, change the construction industry, for small enterprise, we should be able to do it in 1 week, not 10 years, right? We have got to have a theory of data so that people can understand what comes first, what comes second, what comes third. So data is just a matter of measuring what we already know. We create data or mathematical concepts, if you will, for time. We create mathematical concepts for how people are paid. We create mathematical concepts for pay. So all of these issues that we've talked about today, the great thing about it, every one of them was created by entrepreneurs. Every one of them was created such that solutions could be developed by entrepreneurs. That means everything in your industry has to become very, very innovative, and you got to have very, very innovative people to do that. And when you do that, as was said earlier, and get on the right data page, get on the right innovation page, get on the right co-opetition page, you know, and then this is when the innovation really, really happens. It's very, very difficult to deal with the Sears and Roebuck phenomenon. You know, Sears and Roebuck had everything when I was a kid. Now they don't exist. Anybody remember Sears and Roebuck? You remember Sears and Roebuck, right? Anybody remember where you used to get a movie when you were small? From what company? Huh? Yes, where is it now? They got one franchise that went from 10 million to 1. So what happens then, we must learn to understand the relationship between innovation, the data, and new business creation. Am I talking too long, sir?
No, that's perfect, John. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we talk about entrepreneurial, and Peter, what you and I were talking about on the 50th anniversary of the SBA. If Jan's system could provide the SBA with actionable data on the projects, what would that do to the SBA's ability to issue credit?
I mean, it would be more efficient, it would be faster, which ultimately benefits the small business.
So if Jan's system can help the small business, what we're really talking about is the neighborhood that Bill was talking about. So if the digital ecosystem we have is good for the SBA, Bill, a company the size of ExxonMobil, is that same transparency available to you and valuable to you?
I think it is. I thought you were going somewhere else with that question. One of the points I'd like to make is that this CIIOS 2, it applies to whatever industry you want, like solar. You're going to put in a lot of these things. The more you put in, the better you're going to get. The people that trust each other and have data exchange and so forth, they're going to get better and better. They're going to be a definitely competitive advantage. Some of the other people that came to us was like data centers. Anybody here interested in building data centers? It's a huge, huge market, right? Housing, low-cost housing. Another group of people that came to us and said, hey, I want to do a pilot with low-cost housing. I want to build 40,000 units, and I want to start with you and work with it. So I wanted to make that clear that although we're interested in LNG plants, this applies to any industry. There are people in here that are trying to build industries and have new ideas, and it could apply. Certainly, the more is digitized and common data sets, the more efficient it's going to be, right? And it helps us in our industry, but I'm not here to talk about oil and gas.
So Al, we're coming up to the top of our hour before we open it up for, I know, all the questions that are out there. Al started this with Senator Cox 25, 30 years ago, something like that. The foundation that you have laid way back when, as Jan said, I think we're now at an inflection point. There's a number of firms that are starting to buy in, starting to adopt, and the chicken and the egg is now, I don't want to be left behind. So Al, tell me what you think of the journey that you've had to where you started creating the foundation and what it's like to now see it actually hitting an inflection point.
Well, you're very kind to ask. I have not lost the dream. I think I've always been interested in the efficiencies. It just seems so crystal clear to me that standardized vocabularies would be much more efficient than Towers of Babel. And so I've never really lost that dream, and I've watched time fly by as we had this chicken and egg issue. Gradually we gained traction, and I think we're gaining traction now, and I like the liftoff curve that Jan showed in her work, because I think it's real. Having been in the investment banking business for 25 years, I've seen that happen over and over and over again. I was lucky enough to be on the team that took Microsoft public, took Oracle public, took most of that generation of companies public, and they went viral, so to speak, before that term was in frequent use. And this concept of getting more efficient with data can go viral as people lose their fear when they see they're going to lose their advantage if they don't get on this new technology curve, because this is a new technology curve. It happens to be a technology around language, but it is a technology.
Thank you, Al. And so we are at the top of the hour. If anybody has any questions, we wanted to open it up for the floor.
No one in this panel actually addressed the data gravity. There's big issues with corporations in the construction world, in any vertical, that do not want to share their data because they're afraid of losing that data in the cloud or in general. This is a big impediment. It's probably the biggest impediment. It also causes opportunities for cyber attacks along the way. Could anybody shed some light on ways that you can think about conquering this and overcoming this?
If your question is about cyber, I'm going to defer that to Al.
The reason he's referring to me is I was the vice chair and acting chair for both President Bush and President Obama of the President's Infrastructure Advisory Council, which started out as cyber only but evolved into physical security as well. The cyber issue is one of the biggest issues we face competitively, and the tools we have to work with it right now are not working. There are technologies on the horizon that look like they will work, but that new paradigm of technology is facing exactly the same problems that we've been talking about here with data standardization. Who goes first? What do they risk? We do not have an easy answer for that. The other part of your question gets at the company's unwillingness to share data without the cyber dimension. And one of the interesting things we had in XBRL was several industry groups, the biotechnology being an example I remember, spoke against the transparency this would bring. And it occurred to me at the time, this is 10, 15 years ago, that the biotechnology was selling the future of hope, and what XBRL was doing was the transparency of reality right now. So the biotech industry was not interested in dealing in facts, they were interested in dealing in dreams and the emotional side of investment. I may be wrong on that, but that's what I felt at the time. You're exactly right, and there's a lot of game theory around who's going to betray who, when information is surrendered. It forces you to compete on something else other than inside information.
I'm a game theorist, and I absolutely invite you tomorrow to my panel to discuss some solutions that are very, very pertinent.
Yeah, I'd like to add another thought. You know, in the CII world of this OS2, we are actually trying to share data. Because if we put it on the blockchain, everybody in the community can see it. It's now available for everybody. And it's built on trust, right? You have common goals. Hey, we want to build these plants all digitally. We want to do 20% faster or whatever. And everybody that's in the community has that as a common goal. Now we can collect it on the blockchain. It's immutable. We know that that didn't work the last time. That guy was good, that guy was bad. You can rate the owner and say the owner did a good job on that one or not. But we have all that data, and the idea is that it's shared and then you can analyze it. So the CII is built on a different world of trust and collaboration. And it's hard to get there. I'm going to agree with you on that.
I wouldn't bet on blockchain because immutable as it is, it's prone to so much manipulations by the miners who are mining. And if, case in point, you have most of the Bitcoins, at least 20 to 30% being lost. So you cannot really have that as a factor if you really want to think about immutability.
Yeah, I don't think.
Jan, you had a comment?
May I comment?
Oh, sure.
How you doing, good man? I also had a president's appointment for President Bush, and I ran the Fulbright for America. And let me just comment on, so we need to talk? We've probably met before. So let me just comment on that. There's no doubt that if you look at where we are in the country, that is one of the biggest problems that we have, the cyber security. And you know, in running the Fulbrights, we had a lot of data coming out, a lot of countries. Now we have an open society in America, but every country is not open. And you really have to decide, first of all, who does the data belong to, right? The individual or the country. But you have to decide the data that might have a negative impact on America. And then that data that might have a positive impact on industry. I think it is one of the most interesting things, one of the interesting problems that we have in America, given our satellites flying around, you know, given electric cars and et cetera. I don't think blockchain will be utilized by both industry and DOD. I think DOD has to be smart enough, just like they have their own internet, to understand, and just like we have other things, great technologies, to understand the difference between a blockchain for an enterprise and a blockchain for the military that's really, really formulating and making our industries go, our military go right now. So you hit it on the head. I don't want us to have an open innovation in blockchain when it comes to the defense of America, okay? I think that's a whole nother ball game. I think everybody's working on it, and I'm not for combining the two with industry and DOD. That's my experience, and I'm sticking to it.
So I'll close on the cyber question with one thing. NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, does an excellent job. They just revised to Volume 4 their whole roadmap for cybersecurity, and I'm happy to give you a link and share that with you, but it's extensive. Okay, next question.
Yes, sir. First of all, I'm humbled in the first place. I've never worked for any presidents, as this august panel has, or done such amazing, legendary things. So first of all, I'm humbled by that. I have, however, worked with a few hundred clients, power and utility industry and several other industries. And over the last 20 years, what I found out, this is ending up in a question, by the way, but what I found out is even in an industry where everyone is doing the same thing, everyone is largely different in the way that they do it. The data that has come out, and I'm in the compliance industry, but the data that has come out of all these clients is about 3% common, which means 97% of it is that which almost nobody else is interested in. But 3% is very, very common. I know you're just busting to reply. And in that commonality, we find a solution in and of itself, and that is that the problem you have taking 20 years and all this data is just too stinking scary for people to want to share. The problem becoming simpler, a 3% problem, is a whole lot better to even think about when you talk about interactivity, connectivity, and also thinking about a structure before you're just trying to think about meaning. One should precede the other. Everybody's chasing around meaning in this great big red bloody ocean. And the blue ocean exists within the 3% solution of common data. So with that setup, I wanted to say, in that regard, and I see some of you shaking your heads, how do you apply that to shorten the 20-year problem and the interconnectivity incompatibility issue to get to a faster solution?
May I? So in the working group for Orange Button, this is a substantial issue that has come up. And what we've identified is that for the most part, we have large quantities of enumerations that are common and industry standard, including task types, so that we can identify the key tasks that projects need to go through. They have a contract, they've got a permit, there's basic tasks that every project is going to go through. We find that we need to make things what's called nillable, which means that if it's not applicable to you, just don't fill it in. So we're creating a superset of everything that's available, and we are identifying consistently and well what we do have in common. And we are finding that it isn't 3%, it's more like 80% of what we have is in common. And the 20% that's different is around marketing, or it's always different in the same way. Like this AHJ requires 3-line diagrams, and this other AHJ requires 1-line diagrams. And we have, by looking at it both in the specifics as well as in the metadata, in the pattern of that data, we have been able to identify those commonalities to get it closer to 80%. All of our project templates are modifiable by all of our clients. Nobody follows exactly the same process. And they are largely the same, to the extent that every single one of our clients uses the AHJ registry that sets up their permitting structures to move forward with what they're doing. So there's a tremendous amount of value in that 80% when you look at it in the two ways, the specific way and in the pattern way. And those have been the main ways that we've been able to find commonalities where they might have been obscure before.
Just one last quick question then. What is your baseline reference from your commonality that validates that?
So a third of the residential solar installed in the United States is done on Solar Success. So that is my reference point, is those 33% of that installation base. So we have those projects, we have those project templates for, gigawatts getting installed every year. So it's, 200,000 projects annually.
David?
Real quick question on this one then. I've been involved with helping set the data models for many different industries, from healthcare, semiconductor, the intelligence community, and others like that. And with a limited data set, you can begin to go with where you're headed. But most industries don't work with limited data sets. And, data is doubling every 2 years. Most of the data that's doubling is unstructured data, not structured data, which is where the models like you've been talking about apply. And in the average company today, well over 60% of the data that they use to run the companies is unstructured data. And that doesn't work within the type of framework unless you expand the framework to understand different things. So like in healthcare, my team and we were very involved with setting up the Fast Healthcare Interoperable Resources data model. But it has extensions in there where you can go handle the non-standard with adapters to get there. I don't see that in most industries. And so you have to decide whether a limited data set, which is what I assume from listening to you, is what you're doing in your model, is you're looking at the construction side there. Because at one of my companies I was CEO of, we set up a system for public-private partnerships in transportation in Texas. And yes, we had data models, we had a whole data management system as part of it, but we also had a function in there called ball and court. And what it was is the data could go, for example, to the guys in Italy who were providing the funding. It could go to the contract, the general, and then to some of the subs, but also a TxDOT. But none of them wanted the others to know where it is within their court. So what our systems told us was whose court it was in, but not who had it, not what they were doing with it. And I think in many places, particularly industries like you're talking about, with the whole ecosystem here, you've got to begin to do something like that because the culture isn't there, even marketing particularly, but even on operations, even on the side there. Last thing, since you did talk about blockchain, part of my background, I ran the futures program at NSA for a decade. Blockchain version 1, not secure. Public blockchains, I can take over most public blockchains in a few hours with when they advertise to vote. No. Blockchain 2 coming out is better. It's not out yet. But if you want to have fun, go and do DuckDuckGo, or if you must, Google. Quantum blockchain. Now, quantum blockchain is going to begin to change the equations there. And when you mention NIST, you actually need to go not only look at the publication you talked about, but also the NIST Common Security Framework, which just got updated too as part of that. And that's what government agencies and government contractors are now required to meet. But NIST actually has just released a set of documents on how to be quantum encryption safe. It's not all the way there yet, but it's one that you need to do if you're beginning to do them, particularly with infrastructure type of systems. I can tell you they are targeted every day. And you've got to begin to do these things. But going back to the last comment, the data models, I would love to see them. We tried to set them up in semiconductor for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. We tried to do one based on imaging. It worked in a limited data set, but as we begin to add 3D, hyperspectral, multispectral, our tagging fell apart. And you have to go back and begin to do it because of those variances. But I applaud what's doing, but it's not as absolute as we're hearing a little bit. So just my comments.
Let me comment in on David. David, you're talking about a select if system, right? You got all of this data, you select if marketing, select if communication, select if whatever have you, and then you do the mathematically do the correlation between it. If they all look alike, then they all load on the same load, what you're saying, right? Well, in an industry like this, I don't think that they're accustomed to using the data in that kind of way because the very thing that we started out with at the great University of Texas at Austin, hook 'em horns, beat the hell out of Alabama, is that when they came to UT, there was no trust. Okay, there was no trust. There was no competition, right?
There's not a common
They were
lexicon.
different. So in order to do that, to bring the data together, you got to bring it together, and then you can select if this is marketing, select if it's this communications, and then you create many data sets within the data sets. That's what you're talking about. Do that. That's a good way to do. But this industry hadn't matured.
Well, the other problem, Johnny, is there's not a common lexicon.
Yeah.
I can go across these industries. It's just like in healthcare. When we look at the word provider in healthcare, there's over a dozen different definitions of the word provider. And so if you're going and beginning to do tagging, or even to do intelligence tagging, using machine learning and things like that, The lexicon has to be clear. So if I hit the word provider and it has all those different uses, which one is it? And that blows up part of your data model as if you don't have a good lexicon management system.
So we actually do have an editor that is a tree-based that shows the definitions of all of our terms. And we have a lexicon manager for that. We also incorporate both structured and unstructured data, and that's built into the system so that it will be naturally extensible as we change the technologies. So we have built this in such a way that we are intending for it to be future-proofed. I did want to also say that relative to Bill's comment about trust, that I am sure that we've all got different experiences around trust, but our experience is that what is necessary in order to get permit and in order to ensure public safety is often publicly available already, and that the amount of trust issues that we're having are really around individual specific business transactions that are kept in regular confidence, but the trust around the data and the photos that are, have geotagging and timestamping on them, for public safety, it's public record level information about how you installed the roof parts and how you did everything. So the level of detail that we have is extensive, and no one feels particularly proprietary about it in the 200,000 projects. They would prefer the efficiencies of the competition, and where people are more reluctant to compete because they don't want to share, they are literally so much less efficient that they're getting knocked out of the market. So the trust and the speed of trust, I do think, is going to break down our typical and traditional barriers to cooperation in a way that the construction industry hasn't seen in the past, but is becoming commonplace in solar. This is not something that people are concerned about or bringing to us at all.
Another question?
Bill O'Grady. Interesting you're using the word trust, and I was wondering if we can get the panel's thoughts on the concept of the eventual weaponization of some of this aggregated data. I work in oil and gas, so Bill, you're not the only guy in the room. I recently retired. I participated on the committee that generated the industry response to the National Science Foundation's questions on the Macondo incident, the Deepwater Horizon. And one of those questions concerned, why isn't there an aggregated industry database about the performance and reliability of blowout preventers in operations? And there was a real concern in the room that while none of the oil companies in the room were worried about sharing that data, they trusted each other. They didn't trust anyone else. And the comment that was made was when an aircraft crashes, everyone forms up around that data and just tries to solve the problem. If a blowout preventer leaks and it gets out, the media, the public, the interest groups crucify the industry to the point where nothing can get done. And that actually, as they were trying to solve the Macondo incident problem, the work BP wanted to do was actually delayed by the public response and all the government regulators that got involved and all the things they were forced to do rather than just being allowed to solve the problem. So there's a danger that this, while the people in the community might trust each other, do we trust everybody else? What are they going to do with this data to weaponize it against us?
I have an opinion about everything.
I'll give you a partial answer. We were talking about forming these communities and the CIIOS2. Actually, a good part of the research is about how do you kick somebody out? Like, who do you let in? Or they all have the common goals, but if somebody is weaponizing or not acting on the common goals, how do you kick them out? And that's part of the research there. Your question was more about outside parties, but part of the answer on CII was on the inside.
And my thought about the weaponization of this information is where you have the conversations in advance by establishing the taxonomy and working with Sandia Labs, working with NREL, we're establishing what the protocol should be for what the safety standards are and what the standardized responses are. So we're not getting panicked, unhelpful, blocking responses from the government, because we've worked out what is the critical path and identified what information you need to know when in advance of any event that would come up. And so it's not a solution now for a specific problem, and having these conversations, defining common terms, defining what is the root cause and the base elements that you need to know to determine what the right response would be to an event has been very constructive. It introduced new terms, new ways of looking at the problems, and also introducing new business models for solutions that are out there to be solved. So the common terms, having a common language, is like working a marriage, right? If you can get on the same page about the words you're using, you can actually prevent a huge number of problems that just continue to get in the way. So I feel like my experience of this common terms definition feels like that all this deceptive work that's been going on has been all the things required to get everyone on the same page so we can get out of each other's way and actually all do the right thing, which is what we want. It's necessary to row in the same direction for us to succeed collectively as a species at this point in time. So what are we going to do to get on the same boat? And a lot of that means we've got to solve these conflicts, but let's solve them in advance, and let's solve them in these safe spaces, starting with having the same words, just like you would in kindergarten, and then we can grow it up from there as we get more sophisticated. But having the same words is a key part to solving these problems in advance. So that's not everything, but I offer that in case it helps.
Quick question. Thank you for being here, and thank you for, I think that you guys closing the deal today is going to be fantastic. We're going to swarm you in a minute. Can somebody on the stage help the audience here? Some of the audience, there's not as deep as you guys are into the weeds, but can somebody tell me, if we remove all the issues, if we have solved all the problems of commonality, data, taxonomy, cybersecurity, and everything, can somebody explain to us, what does the transaction look like? What is the happy ending of this? I come in, I'm a buyer, I'm a seller, I'm a construction guy, I'm a lender. What does that look like? What happens? It takes what? 30 seconds, 1 day? Can somebody walk me through that answer? What is the happy ending of all this effort?
We got a couple minutes to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one way to look at that is to say exactly the same emotions and rational thought is going to occur with the problem that we're dealing with here that arose when Amazon took over the retailing industry. It's exactly the same. It's just happening at a different time.
I think it'll be just like finance. You look at all the transactions, how much did you have to pay before Schwab came along? How much did you have to pay before everything was automated? So what happened is transaction cost disappears. Everything is automated. And by the way, trust becomes the mathematical things. If you do this and you do this, this person is trustworthy. You've never seen them before. So I think that it becomes just like the finance. And look, finance has done a great job not only in changing its model, right, but allowing me to buy stock right here in a transaction, right, what's happening, nothing. But any kind of transformation with any kind of enterprise, you're right, the retail enterprise like Amazon, what's happening to the airline industry. I mean, we can think of what Herb did Mr. Kelleher did with the airline industry. And the number of transactions go down, so the number of people that you need also go down. I gotta go eat, man, I'm hungry.
We're past our 5 o'clock, and I'm keeping you from cocktails, so I wanted to just, in my final closing comments, we talked quite extensively about collaboration is needed for a digital ecosystem. The collaboration means we have to bring people together and actually share ideas and actually meet face to face. So I want to thank Andreas for bringing this event together, for making it happen. And I also want to thank my panelists because I asked each one of them who haven't met each other, who I knew would get along well because they're all intersecting, to thank my panelists for traveling and spending the time. Time is the most valuable, precious thing we have, for the time. And I want to thank everybody for attending our presentation, and cocktails are on that guy.
Don't go anywhere. You got 10 minutes here. You could be late for next door. Come and be the superstars. Come and get your business card.
People, right?
I need you over here for a selfie. Come around.
Not me.
Come around. We got a selfie here.
And then, yes,